Welcome, parents, to this presentation about core knowledge, which I might call the importance of knowing stuff. My name is Dane Roberts. I'm the Executive Director of Monticello Academy, and I'd like us to start by just seeing if anything comes to mind when I say the word Abraham Lincoln. Any images? Any words? What about Paris? How about the Cold War? Now, you might not know a lot about these subjects, but maybe when I said Abraham Lincoln, you thought of the stovepipe hat or the Civil War. Maybe with Paris, you thought about the Eiffel Tower or a movie you'd seen that took place there. Maybe with the Cold War, you thought about Ronald Reagan or the Soviet Union or nuclear war. Now, if anything came to mind at all, that means you have some background knowledge about that topic. That background knowledge allows you to learn more about that topic, allows you to understand a reference using these words. It allows you to know something about what people are talking about when these things come up. It's been shown that this background knowledge is really important in education and really important to reading in particular. In this presentation, I'm going to explain to you why background knowledge has taken a back seat in schools in America and what core knowledge does to fix that. So there is a knowledge problem in America. There are some really big gaps in what people know, especially about our history. So just as one example, half of the respondents in a survey believe that the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, or the War of 1812 were before the American Revolution. There's some huge gaps in our understanding of history, and as educators, we've come to believe that this is a big problem, and we're going to talk about why it's a problem, starting with just some basics about how we learn and how we read in particular. So in the 80s, there was a study done that really influenced the core knowledge movement and really led to the kind of education that we provide here. It was a study at a university where they brought a bunch of students together and they split them up into 4 groups. They were going to have them read a passage about baseball and then answer some questions about it. And the groups that they broke them up into, based on their scores on other tests, were first of all groups who had a really high reading ability and who knew a lot about baseball. The other group had a high reading ability but didn't know much about baseball. And then the other groups were students who had low reading abilities. Some knew a lot about baseball even though they didn't have a high reading ability, and others had a low reading ability and also did not know much about baseball. They had these students read a passage that was kind of an account of a baseball game. They had a little model that the students could kind of use little toys to act out what was happening, let them process what was happening in the passage that they were reading. And then later they gave them a reading comprehension test to see who understood the passage best. The results were somewhat surprising because in school we always think about reading skills and reading ability and how it's so important that they have these reading skills. And what the study showed was that we don't appreciate the importance of the knowledge that people bring to the task. So students who had a high reading ability and a high knowledge of baseball, of course, did the best when they took the test. But the next student group was the surprise. Students who did not have a high reading ability, but they did know about baseball, were able to understand this passage almost as well as the high readers. And then there was a big drop-off. Even students who read in general very well, if they didn't know much about baseball, they could not comprehend the passage. And then, of course, the lowest group was those who had low reading ability and low knowledge of baseball. What this showed is that if we're trying to have our students become good readers, it's really important they have a wide base of background knowledge. And in schools, we have been neglecting knowledge for years. For decades now, the emphasis has been on skills because that's what's tested, that's what's easier to test. We focus on teaching comprehension skills instead of general knowledge. And it's becoming increasingly clear that this is one of the main reasons why America's reading scores have stagnated for years and years. So background knowledge is truly a foundation for future learning. First of all, people think that we don't need to know things anymore because you can just Google it, right? Why do we need to learn facts anymore? It's available at our fingertips. However, knowing things is important, first of all, because it's required in order to know other things and for gaining expertise in a subject. I think most of us wouldn't want to go to a surgeon who, when they found out what your condition was, said, okay, well, let me Google that, let me find out. To have expertise in a subject, you really have to have a grasp of a bunch of knowledge around that thing, and that starts with building background knowledge. To engage in debate, discussion, dialogue, you have to have some facts at your fingertips. You have to know what's being talked about. And to understand language, to understand when people make allusions to things like literature and culture, then you really have to have some knowledge at your head that You can't just Google things all the time. So background knowledge is really, we consider it like a web. And the more pieces you have in the web, the more you'll be able to catch. So if students come to an academic task knowing a lot of things, then they're going to catch more of what they're reading, of what's being discussed. If students come with big gaps in their knowledge, then things are going to fly through. It'll go over their head, and they're not going to understand what's being discussed. Most schools, despite the importance of knowledge, have no plan for knowledge. And this is usually kind of shocking to people because we just think of schools as a place where you go to learn things and to gain knowledge. But they don't. So why is that the case? Well, I mentioned that standardized tests have really focused on skills, not knowledge. And so people have been chasing the test and saying, we're going to teach reading skills, math skills, and they divorce it from actually knowing things. Another problem, though, is that there's so much knowledge that educators have kind of thrown up their hands and say, well, where do you begin? What knowledge should be taught? There's so much out there. So how can we decide what's most important? You might think, well, schools teach history, right? That's knowledge. They kind of do, but there's a problem with how they teach history, which is illustrated in this chart. There's this idea of the expanding concentric rings of knowledge. And so a kindergartner, their typical exposure is all about me. It's about my five senses, maybe a little bit about my feelings. In first and second grade, they kind of expand out from the self to their families and the communities. They learn about community helpers like police officers and librarians. In third grade, they expand out a little bit. They learn the difference between the city and the suburbs and rural areas. And then finally, in fourth grade, students finally get history per se, where they learn Utah history and geography. They've expanded out to the state. In fifth grade, we expand out further, and that's the first year that students get United States history in a typical school. And then finally in sixth grade is when they learn about world history and geography and get exposure to some ancient civilizations. In core knowledge, we say this is really kind of a tragedy that we wait until students are 12 years old before they really get exposed to world history and geography. And it's a big wasted opportunity to be building that background knowledge over the course of their elementary school years if we wait so long. So what we do in core knowledge is we start building it from the beginning. In first grade, they're learning about ancient Egypt. In second grade, they're learning about ancient Greece. And third grade, they're learning about ancient Rome. And fourth grade, they're learning about medieval times and ancient China, ancient African kingdoms. In fifth grade, they learn about the Aztecs and the Mayas, which they've also touched on in first grade. A lot of this kind of cycles through and repeats and builds on itself. So history really is the backbone of our curriculum. And I'm going to give you a sense of just how rich the history is that students get exposed to. In kindergarten, on the left here, we have American history and geography. They learn about Native Americans, early exploration and settlement of the Americas, and just some basic symbols and important presidents from American history. On the world history and geography side, they learn about the 7 continents and oceans, just a foundation for future learning. In first grade, they go into more depth about early exploration and settlement with Columbus and the conquistadors and the colonies. They start to learn about the American Revolution and early exploration of the American West. In the world history and geography side, they're learning about early civilizations like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, world religions, Mexico, early American civilizations, the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca. Now, as I go forward, I'm just going to quickly show you the other grade levels. You're welcome to pause the video if you want to look in a little bit more detail. There's second grade, in depth about the War of 1812, which I always love that our second graders get that fascinating story that most of us know very little about. Third grade. And fourth grade. Here's fifth grade. Sixth grade. Notice on the right side with world history and geography, again, this is the first year that most students in public schools learn about world history and geography. By this time, the students have been exposed to it, and they're really building on already a rich understanding of, for example, ancient civilizations. And for our campus with 7th and 8th grade, they kind of condense and really treat things as a whole because world history becomes so integrated with U.S. history, with the world wars, etc. In 7th and 8th grade, they get more to 20th century U.S. and world history combined. So history is awesome. It is the backbone of our curriculum, but it's not just history. We value music as a core knowledge school, and the importance of understanding the history of music. In every grade level, students are exposed to these iconic compositions. They also learn traditional songs and American songs. And the beautiful thing is that then it also integrates with history. So, for example, in fourth grade, when they're learning about the medieval times and reading Robin Hood and the Knights of the Round Table, they are learning Gregorian chant and medieval music. Same thing in art. They learn these iconic pieces, they imitate, and they learn studio art. And then it also, as they get into older grade levels, starts to integrate with what they're learning in history. In literature, too, we have a very rich curriculum where students study classic works and learn to appreciate these incredible pieces of literature that have been passed down through the ages. So some people wonder, what should you do as a parent in a core knowledge school? And I hope you do wonder that, because the contributions you can make as a parent are really important at a core knowledge school. You can expose your students to so much through what you do at home. First of all, I'm going to reference you to the core knowledge sequence. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just type in coreknowledge.org or Google search for core knowledge sequence. You can download it for free. It shows you all the topics that students are taught in each grade level. There's also a series called What Your Blank Grader Needs to Know. It's available on Amazon. That's a very parent-friendly guide to things that you can learn about at home to supplement, because we can't do everything here. There is a lot of knowledge and so much that we could do that we'd love to do. So anything you can do to talk about these topics at home really reinforces what the students are learning. Finally, I want to mention E.D. Hirsch, who is the founder of Core Knowledge. He didn't do it so that students can just test better, even though we know that students with knowledge will do better academically. His goal was really to create citizens, to educate citizens, and he believed that shared knowledge was really important to unity as a nation. And I think we've seen that on display, where people have completely different sets of facts and background knowledge that they're bringing to our national conversation and the problems that causes. So he thought that this cultural literacy, that all students having some shared knowledge, was really important to the American project. And we fully believe that. We think all students deserve to have this content-rich curriculum. They deserve to have this understanding of the world that comes through knowing these things. So we'll end with a quote from one of the books they read in 8th grade, which is Animal Farm. All curricula are equal, but core knowledge is more equal than others. This is one of our students who dressed up on our core knowledge dress-up day over that. It's silly, but core knowledge really is what I believe all students should get in a school. And I'm saddened that in so many schools, students are denied access to this wonderful content knowledge that enriches their education so much and makes them better students. Thank you for watching. Please reach out if you have any questions.